Chamber Door presents Obituaries. Well, this is certainly creepier than the porter cabin. But I'll take the warmth on a night like this. Speaking of, let's light that fire. A year of night shifts. And I'm sitting here wondering why I didn't think of this before. Probably because it's a little mad, isn't it? Spouting every impulsive thought into a recorder that no one will hear. Feels like more of an American thing to do. They love the sound of their own voices. And I appreciate the irony of it. Trying to stay sane by essentially speaking to myself. Anyway, here goes. A university graduate with high hopes of an exciting career, instead working security on a graveyard, of all places, in a random part of Liverpool. At least the vicar was good enough to lend me his home during my shifts. He muttered something about staying close by with associates, so I could have the place to myself. I've never really spoken to a vicar before. I grew up in Catholic schools and fell asleep during Mass. I tried to ask about the difference between a vicar and a priest. He just gave me a strange smirk and said he was more of an assistant, before pointing out the amenities of his home and leaving. Anyway, I've started this all wrong. If I'm going to pretend to be speaking to someone, I should at least start with my name. I'm George. I'm an Aquarius, and you're my new best friend, whilst I go through every blabber, anecdote, and possible existential crisis one can have when there is nothing else better to do. It would help if this vicar read anything good. These bookcases are either filled with celestial propaganda or editions of Country Life magazine that seemingly date back to the 1800s. Hold up, what's this? It's a large thin journal with loose sheets of parchment inside. They're all handwritten. They look like obituaries though. I might just have found the most interesting thing in this place. This'll make the next 10 minutes fly by. Here we go. Death number 1, come on down. Jesus fucking Christ. Sorry. Wrong place. The wind. Bloody hell. Some of these are older than those Country Life magazines. Right. First entry. Margaret Greymouth. Margaret Greymouth arrived on April 30th, 1893. Arrived. Strange wording, in Wernigerode, Saxony-Anhalt. I hope I did that justice. Margaret became fascinated with the collection of old and eccentric trinkets from an early age, quickly becoming an astute antiquarian as young as 15. Her family's wealth allowed for such hobbies. Well, That felt like a slight. Bearing no children, her interest led her into occult and pagan circles as she pursued relics of cultural significance. Rumours from other antique dealers at the time suggest she acquired Mjolnir, or Thor's hammer, during the Second World War, and exchanged it with the Third Reich for something greater. Is this seriously an obituary? An excerpt of her personal diary has been attained that holds particular relevance, along with her logbooks confirming the transaction. Quote, "Years of dealing with back-alley quacks and sleazy cultists had left me cynical. The truth is, most antiques that your average layman would happen across are just that. Heirlooms likely stolen and sold in a rather hasty manner, or obscure objects with a frivolous lore attached to them for the sake of alluring gullible worshippers. But I've got too much blood on my hands to stop now. And I'd consider myself one of those gullible worshippers if I had not seen it myself. I'm not sure when exactly this ceaseless fascination of mine began. My father was a lecturer in mathematics, loathing both the peculiar world of folklore and the dealing of salesmen. So you can imagine he was quite thrilled to learn of my enthusiasm in this life. My mother studied natural philosophy, and they met during his brief stay in London as a guest lecturer in astronomy at Bedford University, the first higher education institution in the United Kingdom for women. And with her being newly widowed, they hit it off immediately. It was unusual for the time, but he chose to take her surname, hence my very English name, yet very German upbringing. You can only imagine what I had to endure in my school years. I suppose you can lay it at the feet of that. My mother wanted to know how the universe worked, but also had a deep love for the zodiac. Before, I would have scoffed at you for sharing that love. Now, I know it to be as real as this hand, writing these memoirs. My ventures have since taken me to a Nazi-occupied Poland, specifically Wejkiełwo, a quaint inland settlement with timeless conjecture of Norse influence, and what we refer to as Viking burials. They never actually refer to themselves as Vikings, but Norse, or their respective nationalities. It turns out that conjecture was right on the money. I frequented the local tavern, and paid 2 grave robbers handsomely to excavate a nearby mound I had heard rumour of. And yes, you'd be correct knowing that most Vikings were indeed cast afloat on a river, to be cremated at the point of a blazing arrow. But not all of them. That's the great thing about my profession. The greed and hubris of others that came before you often becomes your own profit. Over an hour. I sat atop that mound, drinking wine and waiting for those peons to hit something other than dirt and rock. Every few minutes, they would hold up a cooking pot or the decomposed head of a cat, unaware that Norse ceremonial burials concerned carrying their earthly possessions into the afterlife. A glaring clue for me that we were onto something, a fruitless dig for them that paid for their next few sojourns down Sailor's Alley. They both became primitively giddy when they happened across a stick pendant representing Gungnir, Odin's spear, closely followed by a golden armband laden with garnets and a sunstone at its centre. I watched their smiles malform, from fortunate glee to covetous intent. I was more than happy to let them have their moment of scheming as they continued to dig until their spades hit something large and metallic. It took their gruntish straining a firm 10 minutes to pull it from the ground, both crashing into the dirt as they did and screaming in fervent pain, clutching their backs. But there it was. a delicately engraved steel head of runes in concentric circles that gave an aesthetic similar to chainmail. The handle's leather, though sullied, shone as no military officer's boots could, with a proud golden frame supporting the steel and a painite gemstone at the base of the handle. The grave robbers didn't need to know just how rare that gemstone was to recognize its evocative impression, and struggled to their feet, mustering the strength for their fiendish task. Knowledge is power in my profession, especially when fairy tales prove true. It didn't matter what liquid I poured into the flask of Dionysus. It would always reach my lips as a deep, fragrant wine of celestial ecstasy. Given my rather blemished history, an endlessly excruciating protective rite was necessary before I could risk so much as a sip. But what can I say? I can't resist a good wine. If one were, however, to foolishly drink from the flask without this rite, or the purity of a kind soul, I'm not sure I'd describe your death as horrific, but instead met with delusional intoxication that turns the most resilient into blubbering children seconds before your heart stops. A better fate than these cretins deserved, but an easy way to remove an obstacle. I offered them both a swig of the flask in celebration, which they gladly took after their labour. They collapsed into the dirt once more, as foam crested over their mouths and the blood vessels in their eyes bulged so violently they looked as though they might burst, blissfully doting on the names of their loved ones in those lonely, futile seconds. After making my own feeble attempt to lift the hammer, I spoke the Old Norse words and potential names of Hloridi, the Loud Rider, or as it is better known, Thor. I've been inundated with pagan and occult practices and stories for so long that I've learned never to assume what these things are. If you're going to try and invoke them, do your research and call them by every name given to them. Anyway, one must have worked. I suddenly lifted the hammer as if it weighed no more than a pair of scissors. Quickly grabbing the other trinkets as a nice bonus, I wrapped them up and retrieved my Reichsmarks from the grave robbers' corpses, before shoveling the loose dirt over them. The sun was by that time rising over Reykjavik. Pulling up my hood and gripping the hammer that was nestled inside bundled cloth with my other findings, I gave the impression and speech of a low-born spinster. Through pity, I was able to attain passage by horse and cart with a local farmer who wanted nothing in return but the satisfaction of a good deed. I arrived in the town of Volin, thanking and nodding repeatedly to the farmer as I hurried down a back street in search of a room where I could examine my acquisitions and post descriptions with extortionate pricing to my elusive buyers. To the shock of the scraggy innkeeper, I tossed them a soiled sack of Reichsmarks and requested that a provision of cured meats, cheese, wine, and appropriate writing material be sent up to my room for the night. No more than half an hour later, I had gone from being a destitute plebeian being booked on an old cart to a lavish banquet in a culturally endowed town. I should have known better, flaunting such wealth in a place that is plagued by the swastika. I fell asleep shortly after 6 p.m, following my letters of correspondence kindly accepted by the innkeeper's boy for postage, and a prolonged copper bath that was enough to tranquilize me after the 30+ hours I had been awake. It was no more than 3 hours later I awoke to the invasive notion that I was being observed. I bolted upright, throwing off the wool blanket, and feeling the raw cold of a Polish winter night. My window had been opened as wide as the hinges would allow, and I swiftly checked under the bed where I had placed the hammer. Nothing was missing. As I lifted my head from the ground, I heard the flicking open of a black crackle lighter. I turned my gaze toward the copper bath, and beside it, where no chair had been before, a seated silhouette of a man, lighting a cigarette. Through the pitch-blackened flash of light, I recognised the countenance of a military officer, with typical groomed short hair and immaculate uniform. 4711 Cologne, I can smell the Deutsch before you even speak it. I snapped in a frustrated and dry tone. He cackled through the smoke extending from his lips. Correct. But I'll entertain your English, Margaret. The way he said my name in that imposing tone carried a blend of disgust and resentment. If you're planning to take advantage of me, he chortled again. I didn't feel the need to finish my threat. I would just reach for the hammer upon his advance and get a true look at what it could do. He just sat there for a few moments, the silhouette of his face staring blankly in my direction. In his right hand, between his fingers, rested the glowing cigarette, and through its smoulder I caught the glint of a rather large ruby crowning a golden ring. I'm here to offer you a trade, he finally mumbled as he placed the cigarette between his lips. And what exactly do you think I have that's worth trading? I wasn't about to divulge any details regarding who I was or my findings, gas chamber or not. He rose from the chair and walked towards the open window, flicking the cigarette into the brisk night air as he surveyed the village streets. As you're fully aware, Herr Himmler is very concerned with the pride of our race, so much so he has us scouring the earth for symbols of our strength, our lineage. Am I supposed to be following here? Reticence was my best defense. He began rubbing the ring on his right hand with his left before he spoke again. You should not be as careless as to leave such confidential information in the hands of a peasant boy. It is a small town, and people notice when a stranger arrives, especially a wealthy one. I knew then that my fatigue and yearning for palatial comfort had been my undoing. Lucky for you, I am one of the more pragmatic SS Führers. Believe you and me, some of us are positively insane, and would have exterminated you most violently should they have learned of you laying your hands on Mjolnir. I sneered at his derogatory insinuation. But where others see greed and filth, I see someone of value. So I propose a trade. With that, he removed the ring from his finger and held it up against the moonlight for me to behold. Someone in your line of work can probably guess what it is. Care to try? I kept my lips sealed as his hubris made my blood boil. I was tempted to reach for the hammer anyway, but not being sure of my odds in this foreign place, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Or even worse, lost the best acquisition of my career. He giggled at my defiance, and suddenly I became aware of his intrusive body odour that the cologne and cigarette smoke had masked. His emaciated fingers repeatedly twisted the ring for me to observe in the pale light. It is Solomon's seal. The net that imprisons things, if unleashed on this world, would surely exterminate us. Is it part of the lunatic's handbook to abuse the word extermination? My flippancy caused a flash of irritation to cross his face, which gave me some satisfaction as I dissected his proposition. If that is truly what you claim, that is a weapon of mass destruction like no other. You and your Reich wouldn't need guns or tanks if you... The realization made me burst out in laughter. You don't know how to use it. I gloated, followed swiftly by a deep sense of dread. And you think I can weaponize it for your monstrous cause? I'd sooner die right here than... He threw the ring at my lap, and the obsidian red glimmer of its stone pulled me into a trance-like state as I gazed at its beauty. If that was the order, wouldn't I disturb the lives of you and your loved ones until you cooperated? His tone changed from a perverse maleficence to one of defeat. You are right. We cannot use it, and we do not want it. The odour of sickly acetone engulfed my nostrils, causing me to reel back in my bed. I know that smell from a few rustic excursions to the east during this irrational conflict. After a few glances made towards the remains of my supper, I hesitated to ask what seemed like a ludicrous question. "Are you hungry?" He snapped his head away in response and threw himself back into the chair. Lighting another cigarette, he slumped back, tilting his head to stare at the void black stone ceiling. "We all are." The words barely escaped his throat. "I'm not the first to wear that ring. We take it in turns. It consumes you, makes you yearn for a hunger you cannot sate, a thirst, if you try to quench, will drown you. No drug or company can satisfy you. Some of the more superstitious officials even attribute it to our dwindling war effort. To put it plainly, because you have no choice but to accept my offer, I'm handing you either the biggest challenge of your obscure career, or a death sentence. You're not taking the hammer. It is priceless." Once again, he stifled my protest, this time with the cock of a Mauser pistol. "There are SS officers already making their way to your correspondence in Berlin, Paris, and London. Mr. Royce has already voiced resistance against the Führer, so his numbered days will be made shorter. Camille Dubois is already sleeping with German officials to stave off the chopping block, and Miss Mordaunt, well, she will be harder to get to. But the children she leaves with the nanny all day, not so much." He doled out this threat as if reading from a menu. "I think you care more for your own life than you let on, Margaret. The notion of a bullet may not scare you, but the destruction of your reputation as the little legend you've made yourself to be. Not a single one of your odd cohorts will have anything to do with you. You will fall from grace in the harshest sense." My eyes did not avert from the ring as I measured my response. The legend, or fiction, states there are some 72 demonic entities inside that little stone. If it is what you're selling me, how am I to know what inside is causing your affliction? He pointed the pistol directly at my forehead. "You keep thinking this is a negotiation. You are taking that ring whether you believe me or not, and have been too stubborn to realize that not only am I letting you live, but gifting you the opportunity to become so much more should you control it." I would have been convinced he was another drug-addled Nazi, if it weren't for how measured he appeared to be. Why would he sell me such a story when he could simply snuff me and take the hammer? "You have either just killed me slower than that bullet, or you're completely out of your fucking mind." He shrugged at my conclusions and stood again, walking over to retrieve the bag from under the bed. I instinctively dived toward him and received the unforgiving steel of his pistol across the temple for my efforts. "Maybe both," he chortled once more. "Your time is precious now. Spend it wisely. Who knows? You might just save both of us." To my astonishment, he mumbled the same incantations that it took me half an hour to remember, then lifted the hammer and motioned toward the door. "I will leave you your trinkets. I am not a cruel man. You will need the money after all, to either relieve yourself of its burden or enjoy what terrible life you have left. Good luck, Margaret. Now I swear this is true. It was not some hypnopompic hallucination or the wine." As he left the room, I could see him more clearly in the dim light of the hallway. On the back of his head was a large bald patch where his hair should have been, and I don't know how else to describe it. the clear impression of a healed exit wound. Wait, is that it? Come on, where's the rest of it? There's no more diary pages, it's just more obituaries. Well, that's bollocks. Even if it was complete hogwash, that's the most entertaining thing I've read on one of these shifts. Wait. There's one more page here. With her name on it. Margaret Greymouth passed away on April 30th, 1975. Same day as her birthday, bloody hell. From liver failure. Leaving a rather large collection of extremely rare and highly sought after artefacts. She has, in her final will, generously donated them to the local parish to which she became accustomed here. The ceremony and burial will take place within the grounds. No relatives or acquaintances are to be contacted for attendance. So she was buried in this graveyard. Well, obviously, George, why else would her obituary be here? At least the wind looks like it's calming down. I'm going to take the opportunity for a cigarette. Okay, I'd like to say that I didn't bother because of the wind. But I lit my cigarette, and as soon as I looked up across the gravestones, it must have been a branch, surely. I thought I saw someone all the way across the yard, standing next to a tree, waving at me very, very slowly. It looked like a woman. Behave, George. You're just tired and spooked after that story. I'm going to see if I can take a nap. This fictional audio play was written and created by Will Akers. Full credits and source links are available in the episode notes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or to actual events is purely coincidental. Thank you for listening.